The Minnesota State Capitol opened this week following a 3-year renovation project. I had the opportunity to talk with 2 key state officials who were directly involved in the restoration efforts. From the basement to the top of the dome, the structure has been refurbished to its original grandeur, originally conceived by architect Cass Gilbert. From restoration work in the beautiful chambers to the detailed refurbishing of the building's artwork and murals, from foundation reinforcement to the repairing of the Capitol dome, and from the complete remodeling of offices and rooms to the discovery of long-covered skylights, the Minnesota State Capitol will be an amazingly modern building while showcasing its Renaissance beauty. The multi-purpose restoration project took several years to complete, and it had the goal of making the building safer, healthier, and easier to occupy. We recently talked with the Department of Administration Commissioner Matt Massman, who oversaw the project.
Well, Shannon, the overall goals that guided the entire restoration were architectural integrity, life safety, and functionality. The work that was done here in Room 123 is particularly indicative of the work to improve the functionality of the building.
Functionality, such as installing committee tables that allow senators to converse with each other face to face, a vestibule leading into the committee rooms so hearings are not interrupted, monitors for the public and audience to view presentations, and hearing assist technology to monitor the hearings. Some of the committee room locations have changed as well, with 2 new Senate committee rooms being located on the ground floor of the Capitol. Separate Senate and House committee rooms will be located in the east wing of the building.
For people who have been to the Capitol quite a bit, the layout of the Capitol will have changed somewhat. So I think over time that might shift the way the Capitol is used and shift the way traffic and people flow through the building as well.
In particular, former committee rooms 107 and 112 will serve as caucus rooms for House members, with stairways leading to the rooms from the House chamber. And there will be better accommodations for the people organizing tours of the building.
The Historical Society will have a space on the ground floor that is a classroom space, particularly for students who visit the Capitol in order to learn about the Capitol while they're here.
One of the biggest changes in the State Capitol renovation is the basement. In fact, it doesn't even look like a basement, does it?
That is a really good point. No, it doesn't look like a basement, or I hope it doesn't look like a basement anymore after the restoration. There will be, again, a number of things happen to the basement, but one of the key changes to the basement is reflective of the life safety improvements that have been done to the building. One of the key reasons why we pursued the restoration in the first place was to upgrade to modern technology and modern mechanical systems.
Commissioner Massman believes people will be impressed with the most visual change to the basement, a new space called the Casoda Room, which will be directly under the rotunda and serve as an area for people to gather.
There will also be substantial new public space in the Rathscaler area. So the dining space of the Capitol, of course, will still be the Rathscaler, but the space itself will be larger and accommodate more people.
I know the Capitol Press Corps is excited to be returning to the Capitol. How have their needs been accommodated?
Transparency and open government depends on access to the media, and so that is a really key feature of the work that's done in the basement also. Prior to restoration, the media was in the basement, but not really in facilities that were intended to accommodate media. So the key way to think about the new media space, I think, is that for the first time there will be space in the media, space in the Capitol that's actually designed for media.
From a dedicated press room to local video feeds, to natural light in some of the press offices, the media space will be very different than their previously cramped quarters. Not only the media will be better served in the renovated Capitol, but the public as well, with new spaces, mainly on the 3rd floor, where the Senate offices were once located.
We're all familiar with Days on the Hill, which oftentimes brings very large groups of people, public, citizens to the Capitol to witness and be part of the democratic process. And a lot of times they had been accommodated just in corridors and in spaces that weren't really designed for that. Now with the new Capitol restoration, we'll have public space that they'll be able to kind of set up camp during the day, host either gatherings or meetings for the activities that they have there for their day on the Hill.
From improved stairways and bathrooms to better lit hallways and reorganized vending areas, the Capitol is being updated while still respecting Cass Gilbert's vision. I couldn't help but notice when I entered the building that the elevators have glass doors.
The elevators actually originally had glass doors. That's the way Cass Gilbert designed the building. That was his vision. So while those of us who have been, that are alive today and have been in the Capitol have never seen the glass doors in the elevator, but Cass Gilbert's original vision was to allow much more natural light to pour into the building, as well as for those in the building to be able to be better connected with the grounds around the Capitol. Well, we didn't have any photos to guide the restoration of what the original doors looked like. As part of the effort to restore the architectural integrity of the building, a key piece of the elevator restoration has been to restore those glass doors that allow light to pour in from the elevator shafts into the building on all of the floors. It's going to be a really neat feature that I think people will be really impressed by.
During the state capitol renovation, money was appropriated for the restoration of the artwork. How is that project going?
Well, this is going to be one of the most amazing parts of the project for people when they walk into the Capitol for the first time. Again, as someone who has spent a fair amount of time working in the Capitol, much of the artwork almost was not something that caught your attention because it had been, either there was grime that had accumulated or tarnish, or the artwork had become dull. So as part of the restoration, really all of the murals in the state Capitol and much of the decorative painting in the hallways and the hallways and the corridors has all been restored.
Brian Pease of the Minnesota Historical Society talked about some of the restoration work done to enhance the state Capitol's artwork. Brian, before the restoration work began at the state Capitol, the murals were really dingy.
Yeah, that's correct. The art has really been one of the spectacular results of this project, was the art conservation work. And before then, when people would walk in the building, what we were seeing were paintings that were probably with 50 or 60-year-old varnish, so that had really darkened. You had dust, and even before they were refinished, before the last refinishing with the varnish, there was smoke. People were smoking in the building. So what we were seeing in those artworks throughout the building were not exactly what they would have appeared like in 1905. So everything was much darker.
The brightening of the murals and wall panels helped showcase Cass Gilbert's original intent and design.
I think that's one thing the public will really be amazed at. They'll see a brighter building because of the lighter colors as they would have appeared in 1905. A good case in point is when you walk in the rotunda, there's an inner walkway by the battle flags. And for as long as I've been here, that was painted tan to match the other surrounding walls. And historically in 1905, that was a dark blue ceiling, and that's been restored and brought back.
The restoration project yielded some surprises.
I guess what I was surprised at is how much of all the paintings, all the murals were painted over or overpainted. That means that in the 30s, they were hiring artists during the Depression to give them employment. And so they painted over, the compositions are the same, but they painted over colors or added drapery to the figures or added a bush here or there. And so when the conservators came back and said, well, this is like 95% overpainted, that's a concern, because how do you remove that paint, or where do you go with going back to the original? And so there was a lot of effort. The decision was, let's go back as much as we can to what these paintings would have looked like.
The Civil War paintings displayed in the governor's reception room and anteroom were controversial, but will be returned to their original locations. 2 other paintings from the reception room will be relocated to another site in the building.
Then there are the 2 historic scenes of Father Hennepin and the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux that were determined to be moved out of that space but still kept in the Capitol. And so they'll be displayed in another room in the Capitol, and we'll have a lot more robust interpretation, hopefully some interpretive kiosks that people can hear both sides of the story of why some of the artwork is controversial, the historic accuracy or inaccuracy as portrayed by some people.
During the renovation, workers found skylights previously hidden from view.
Skylights were an important feature of the original architecture. The building was wired with electricity when it was constructed from 1896 to 1905. But at that time, the bulbs, you had like a a 40 watt and a 60 watt, and they weren't as bright as we might be used to today. So Cass Gilbert created the spaces to have as much natural light coming in. And so every chamber, a lot of the side rooms on the 3rd floor, and the big grand staircase skylights were all implemented to bring that natural light into the building.
What are some of the Minnesota Historical Society's plans for tours of the building?
What we've been telling people, it's going to be spectacular to come back here as a citizen or as a school kid or as a teacher bringing their school groups. And you don't necessarily have to have the before and the after knowledge, because just as you walk in the building, I think you'll be amazed. People are already amazed at the architecture and the huge soaring dome and all the beautiful staircases, and now it's just going to be heightened even farther because you have this, important project being completed, and people are anticipating all kinds of these new things to happen or be seen in the building. And our tours will be pretty much the same. We're going to visit the same locations. We'll go to the governor's reception room. We'll go to the House and the Senate, the Supreme Court chambers. When the roof repair is done, we can go back to the quadriga, but that probably won't be until after the building is completely finished this summer. There's a lot to see.